A disclaimer for listeners. This episode explores the mental health challenges that students face and includes discussions on sensitive topics like substance abuse, self harm, and grief. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling, please seek professional support. Welcome back to another episode of Class Dismissed. I'm your host Tavishee Banerjee, and today we have with us Fathima Asghar. This episode, we're talking about how what if this isn't just a rough patch? This is the mental health talk that you wish that your school gave you. Today we have the beautiful Miss Fathima Asghar, who has spent around 2 decades working with kids, parents, and teachers as a parent consultant, a mindfulness educator, a life skills educator, and she's tackled tough topics like child behavior, emotional resilience, personal safety, and even sexuality education. She has trained teachers and parents worldwide, bringing mindfulness and connection into both homes as well as schools. Through her work with Evolve Ed, she's all about strengthening relationships between parents and teenagers. So, today with her, we are discussing students' mental health. Not just the usual topics about how we can take care of ourselves, but also how we can get through really tough times together as a student, how we can deal with things like relationships, griefs, personal safety. And this is kind of the no nonsense discussion that we wish our schools would tell us. But now we have Fatima ma'am with us, and welcome. It is so good to have you here.
I'm super excited. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. So let's cut straight to it. So, according to Healthy Mind study, which is from 2023, college students are experiencing anxiety and depression at record levels. 44% of students report symptoms of depression and 41% report anxiety. I wanted to ask you, why is it, from your experience, do you think that stress and anxiety in students are at an all time high? And given that you have worked over 2 decades in this field, have you seen any changes in the patterns of mental health students?
Well, I think that's a very, very important question to pause and reflect. I think there's never one reason why children today, young adults, are experiencing so much of anxiety and depression. We cannot isolate that reason as this. I think there are so many things that have changed over a period of time. So, for example, we're living in a very overstimulated, overpopulated, overloaded, overconsumed, the all
Yeah,
that over that we talk about, overwhelming. We're living in that culture where we're constantly stimulated with data, information,
yeah.
and there's so much of noise.
It's
But
really
trust me,
tough to get a break. It's really tough to just be bored or, be empty or free. There's always a lot of stimulation.
yeah, yeah. And we're always running on the treadmill where I'm not very sure. Why are we running? We don't know. Nobody tells us. We're just running because we need to run. And we're very scared, very afraid to even pause and to rest. The moment you rest, the moment you pause, we feel like we're going to be left behind. And of course, we have our parents and our teachers and, the society behind us who's always telling us that you need to run with the world. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. So the truth is that we're living in a lot of noise, and our bodies, our nervous systems, they're not made to match up with that speed and the noise and the kind of race that we're talking about. And that's the reason why, one of the reasons why I must say that there's so much of anxiety and scatteredness in the minds, and there's so much of also sadness because I can't match up. I'm somebody who I love to take my time. Like I'm a kind of person who likes to slow down. I can't run. It's just not me. And somewhere people feel like they've been robbed of their authentic self, like their real true self. They're a kind of person who are not meant to do this, but they're doing it because we gotta do it. So that creates a lot of anxiety and worry and so much more.
You're right. I think the imposition of this idea that you have to always keep up and that you always have to be at your 100% is actually much more detrimental than it is encouraging or beneficial to students. And on those lines, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the worst mental health advice that you think is being given out but is actually quite harmful?
So if you're talking about mental health advice, which is given by, let's say, the adults to children, It's nothing. So I can't really pinpoint on the worst mental health advice, but I can probably talk about advices that are given which are damaging, which is not helping
Right.
adults. So for example, it's like, all right, just move on. Like just move on. It's a phase. It's going to go. It's you don't have to take it very seriously. Get up and work, and or maybe something like if you're finding it so difficulty now, then you know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. How are you going to handle stress when you go into corporate world? Come on, you need to come somewhere, uh, buckle yourself up, and you need to run. So these are the kind of recommendations that students hear from their adults, and I don't really, I can't really blame them. I can't blame the adults to say this because trust me, they haven't been where these kids are. So as adults, we never faced this kind of stress and anxiety and pressures, the pressures to look good, the pressures to do well, the pressures to get into best colleges. So they are probably in another frame of mind coming from their experience. They're trying their best as adults to help help their children to get out of that state. So I guess there are these kind of advices which are really not helpful,
Yeah.
which could be damaging in the long run because the child just suppresses those emotions. It's as simple as when you are or I am experiencing something which I need to experience, which is very heavy in the heart.
Mm.
It could be sadness, or it could be fear, or anxiety, or worry for that matter. I need to process it at that point of time. And if I don't do that, and if I just kind of let it be, in a sense, I kind of rush myself out of it,
Mm.
then of course it's going to be a place where I suppress. So it is not something that is helpful for anyone to be.
But I like how you said that it's not as if they're intentionally trying to trivialize the students' feelings or intentionally trying to make them feel small or stupid for feeling those things, but it's rather just a sort of misunderstanding or a generational gap that's coming into play.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I'm going to just look at, you're talking about generation gap, something which I have noticed in young people. They're very quick in labeling things,
Okay.
like generation gap.
Okay.
This gap always existed.
Hmm.
Even with my parents to their parents, it's always there. But the way we look at this gap today is very different from where my parents or my grandparents actually looked at. We're very quick in labeling, titling things and kind of telling them, oh, this is what it is. So the moment you kind of label it and title it as this is what it is, then there's no scope for us to work. Like, for example, also, the vocabulary that we use. So a lot of times with children and high school students that I work with, they're very, very quick in diagnosing themselves as, okay, I'm an anxious person. I have
Hmm.
anxiety. I have a lot of stress. I'm depressed. But if you kind of take them in your confidence and you talk about this, they're just worried about something. So if you look at when I was growing up, we never had this vocabulary of anxious or depression or anything of that sort.
Yeah.
We always use very simple words. Okay, I'm afraid.
Hmm.
I'm worried. Like, mujhe bahut pareshani, I'm very afraid. So, and then you have, your parents to come and say, hey, you know what? Why are you worried about something? It's okay. So we never used words to label it to a level where we could actually, kind
Right.
of diagnose themselves as this is what it is. So even our vocabulary is changed.
That's a really good point. Coming from, the new generation, from Gen Z, I think the number of times that I've heard I have OCD when in fact you just like having a clean room, or I'm depressed when in fact you maybe just be sad over one thing. You're right. I think we do tend to overuse these terms a lot. And one thing that I've noticed is that when you do overuse it, it kind of underplays the seriousness of it. It's like inflation. If you keep throwing it around, it's gonna mean less when the actual, let's say someone's actually struggling. It's gonna be like, a whole boy cried wolf kind of situation. How can we fix that?
How can we fix not labeling and not jumping into conclusions?
Because we're very natural and very quick to doing that.
Yeah.
So what's that kind of mindset shift that we need to stop doing that?
Well, I think culturally we need to, or even personally, just know that you're speeding. Just know that you're rushing. Because a lot of times when you're rushing, when you're titling, like for example, you said, okay, I have OCD. So that's the reason why I want my room in certain ways. I want things to be in certain ways. But just know that you're labeling it. And just ask yourself, I mean, is somebody who has the experience, someone who has the wisdom to actually identify whether you have OCD or not, or it could just mean that we have I have traits of just things which needs to be under my control. So I'm actually coming from that place that I need things to be in my control, and that's the reason why I need my things to be kept in places. So is it just that, or is it clinical side of OCD? So it's all about just being aware, just pausing, and not being in a hurry to label yourself. And I think one advice which I think I would tell everybody, which sums everything up, is stop reading things on Google. There was something which we do is, my older daughter is like that, and I've seen a lot of children who are very quick in picking up their Google, and they feed off their symptoms and say, oh, I have OCD, or I have anxiety disorder. Stop reading things and go to people. It could be your counselors, therapists, psychologists, your teachers, probably someone who you trust, and just talk to them saying, I'm feeling something. Do I have anxiety disorder? Is it a disorder at all? And they are the ones who will tell you that maybe it's not a disorder. Maybe you just need this. So stop reading things. Don't rely on information so much.
That's really good advice. There are a lot of cases, and I've heard of a lot of cases happening around in my peer circles where someone thinks that they genuinely might have some sort of disorder, OCD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. I've heard of a lot of cases where people get kind of conflicting diagnoses. And so in that case, what should a student do?
So, for example, if someone has symptoms of anxiety, so if you go to a clinical psychologist, they're going to do a clinical diagnosis, and they will give you a clinical side of the symptoms that you have. But if you go to a counseling psychologist, then they're going to look at it from the counseling perspective, relational, emotional. So they're going to give you that. So I think A is for you to A is I think I don't have the right answer for this, because I think today it's very confusing. And I think the more you talk about it, the more you talk about your symptoms to people, the more confused that you get. So
Right.
I think the better would be to just look at one single person, maybe a counseling, work on that. So if that is not working out, then go to a clinical psychologist and see if something that can be done from there. But usually, let me tell you this, if it's a clinical symptoms, it's easier to diagnose. You can't really miss it.
Right, right.
And for example, if you are not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, and if you're not able to do your daily chores, you're not able to focus, you're not being able to pay attention, you're not being able to get out of bed. So if a counselor who you go to is looking at it as a pattern, so imagine you have 3 weeks, it's been 3 weeks or maybe a month, and you feel like it's not coming down, then in that case, the therapist is supposed to get to some work with you.
Right.
But if it's not working, then it's also a good idea to get yourself assessed by somebody who's in the clinical
Right.
space and see if there is something which is going wrong over there, and then take a call on what is happening.
So, from these symptoms that you've mentioned, are those the warning signs of something more serious? Like, how can we distinguish between someone just maybe having a bad week or having a mental disorder? How do we know, if it's something more serious? How do we know if it's not just a rough patch?
Good question. You have an exam that's coming up, you have a race coming up, and you're worried because you're stressed about it, you're worried, you're anxious before the exam or the race. It's a very normal response. But if that worry and that anxiety is is throughout in a day, you don't need triggers to get you into that anxiety mode. You're just worried for nothing. You can't sleep, you can't eat. Well, those are the times where you need to somewhere reach out for some help and support. and talk to people and see this is what's happening. But a normal stress is, you're doing things for the first time. You're starting a conversation for the first time. Maybe you're speaking for the first time on a stage. Now, those are the kind of situations where normally people do have some sort of anxiety, butterflies in their stomach, sweaty palms, palpitations. So these are fine. But if it goes after the event is over, then it should be okay because your body is normally responding to that. But if it just continues, then it's going to be a problem and an issue. So let me tell you this something very interesting, which I think nobody talks about it, but it's very, very close to my heart. So 8 years ago, not 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I had a lot of anxiety. For 6 months, I was continuously anxious about something, and there was no trigger for it.
Right.
So I was given some medications which I didn't take, thankfully.
Okay.
And after 6 months, I realized that it was nothing to do with my emotions. It was nothing to do with my mind. It was actually my gut.
You had like physical problems.
It was my digestion and my gut. So a lot of times we confuse anxiety and we confuse stress and overthinking because that's something which people don't talk about is your body and the way it is, because that's how it is. Gut and mind, they're connected with each other. So when the mind is overthinking, your gut gets, a little uncomfortable and
vice versa.
And vice versa, right? So it was there. So when I corrected my gut, my anxiety just went away. So my palpitations came down, my sweatiness came down, and that was a phase. And that's when I realized that anxiety need not be because of something that is outside. The triggers may not be always outside. The triggers also could be something that is probably not okay inside. So today I find a lot of high school students, young adults, you know about their eating habits.
Yeah.
And just, there's a Swiggy and there's Zomatos and there are pizzas and there's a lot of processed foods that's going on. The kind of choices that we make, we're not sleeping well, we're not taking care of our bodies.
Yeah.
And our bodies.
And then we wonder why we're so anxious all the time, or why we might find it hard to breathe or sleep.
Yes. So it's a good idea to get yourself, apart from meeting a counselor or a therapist or a clinical psychologist, also look at somebody who can assess your gut and run some tests, vitamin D, with B12, to see if everything is okay inside as well. And do a lifestyle change. Get a lifestyle coach, like meet up people, like do an introspection of how is my lifestyle, what am I eating, what is my body digesting, not digesting. So meet those kind of people as well, because they'll give you the right idea of what are the kind of changes that you need to make.
Speaking of knowing when something is more serious than it may appear, and also about what we put into our body, I wanted to ask you about substance use in teenagers. I think in your experience, you might have seen that it is getting increasingly common for college kids, high school kids to be experimenting with substances, with cigarettes, with marijuana, and hopefully not, but other substances as well. And I wanted to ask, I think experimenting may be a normal part of high school or college, but again, where is that line between experimenting and just kind of having high school, college fun and actually developing an addiction and using it as a coping mechanism for yourself? How do we recognize that?
The best answer is when you know you don't want to go there, don't even start. Okay. So don't even experiment with things which you feel like you don't want to go there. And that comes with a very strong willpower and your values.
And intuition, I think.
And intuition, yes. So if you feel and if you think that, I'm a kind of a person, so you need to be a little preventive, in a sense that you need to decide things beforehand and really decide yourself and tell yourself that, I have decided I'm going to experiment with my looks. I'm going to experiment with, let's say, my shoes. I'm going to experiment with my travel. I'm never going to experiment with smoking and with drugs or any sort of substance abuse. And I'm very clear about that. And the moment you get into a place where you are offered and they're just, pushing, inviting us to just, take that little smoke and just kind of taste it, you say no, that is something which not there. So forethought is something which I think humans have, we all have, which animals don't have.
Yeah.
And if we can use that forethought and tell ourselves that, okay, I am not going to experiment with this and I'm very clear about it. And no matter how much I'm pushed into it or pressurized, I'm not getting it. And that's it. And please respect my decision. This is something that I'm not going to do. That's the best way. Because these substances are very addictive in nature.
Yes. Yes.
So once you get once, you try, you're bound to try it the second time, third time, and it becomes the willpower that we have becomes too diluted and weak for us to say no at that time.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into the excuse of, oh, just one cigarette, or just one more drink, or one more shot. Um,
Absolutely.
but I do also want to get a little bit more serious and ask you what happens when our willpower doesn't hold us strong, and what happens afterwards, once we have gotten into potentially the habit of smoking, of drinking, of being on substances, and how do you come back from that as a teenager, as a college going student, or as a school going student? How do you come back from that?
So if you're aware and you feel like I've got into this too far, again, it's your willpower. Again, it's your need to get out of it that'll help you. Because if you're somebody who doesn't want to help yourself, then nobody can help you or help that individual. But if you're a kind of person who feels like, no, that's it, I need to get back, then that healing journey is something that is possible with your support system in place, with a good therapist, with that kind of drive that you have. Just reach out to people, talk to people, show your vulnerability, say this is something that I have done, and it's definitely okay with that. And it's never too late to come back,
Hmm.
in a sense that even if you think you've gone too far, it's all right. You can always seek help, talk to people, and come back. And that's in your hand. And that's a choice that one makes. Nobody can make that choice for you. And if you meet the right people, get the right support system, they will help you to come back. And through a lot of counseling, through a lot of medication, lifestyle choices, and through connections, and through group work, there are a lot of ways that people can come back. So that is a possibility.
It is. That actually is very reassuring. Because I think a lot of high school students and college students have this fear of, and you're right, it does require a forethought that even if you have that fear, then keep that fear, and hold that fear, let it keep you strong, because fear at the end of the day is just something that's trying to protect you. It's not something that's trying to eat you alive. It's actually trying to do the opposite. Um, and now that we're on the topic of being there for each other, having your tribe, I wanted to talk about something a bit serious, which is suicide and grief.
Mm.
Um, so, suicide, according to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2023, said that suicide is the second leading cause for death among 15 to 24-year-olds. And unfortunately, in recent times, there have actually been very, very many cases of suicide in high schools and college students. And college students, not just in their fourth or third years, but rather in their first or second years. So, this age group is, I think, going through a lot by not only dealing with what's going on in their own mind, but also seeing the people around them falter. And so, as friends, as communities, how do we deal with that? One is, I have two questions for this. One is, how do we do our best to maybe prevent it?
Mm.
And second question is, in the unfortunate event that it does happen, and it does happen, how do we grieve? How do we move forward? How do we process that grief while still maintaining our responsibilities as a student?
So let me tell you a story. I think this is something which will probably be will relate to a lot of high school students. So there was this one child, very upset about about things that's not happening at home. And she was very quiet. She was very chirpy and bubbly first, but then over a period of time, she became very quiet. And she used to have these phases where she was chirpy, and then she was very quiet. And one thing about these, so I'm talking about a friend who's my daughter's friend. So I'm talking from that perspective. What I love about that friendship, that means that girl and my daughter and two, three other friends, is that they kept a eye on all the changes that child was projecting, that friend was projecting.
Mm.
And they used to always come and tell me, Mama, this child is, my friend is, being quiet today, and, she's chirpy today, she's okay today. This is what she said. So everybody were actually keeping a watch and helping her out and paying attention to what was really happening. And I mean, that kind of support is something that was very important. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because this child who was going through so much at that time, after a year, came back and told her school counselor that if it is not for my friends, I would have actually suicided, because there was no meaning behind why that was done. Yeah. So I think that subtle signs that children show, that needs to be known, but that also comes when you have that friendship, when you have that connection with your people. But if you're not that kind, then there are times that we can actually miss that. So being proactive means really taking care of people around us, looking at, if someone is showing signs of self-harm, or even jokingly saying that I'm going to do self-harm, or is probably, taking a pin and, ripping their skin off, and not taking that lightly and saying, oh, it's just something. No, it's not something. Self-harm can never be just something. It is something to be taken seriously. It is something that we need to talk about. It is something that we all need to address, right? Because you're in pain, and you're in so much pain that you're somewhere inflicting pain on you to yourself. So it's never small, right? So I mean, that's something that I loved about this support group, because they are the ones who actually help that child. So the point over here is, keep your eyes, keep your attention on people around you, with your friends. And even if it's a small indication, do talk about it. It's just not something small, it's something that we need to take care of. If you have a counselor in the school, please go and talk to them. If you have a parent, maybe the child's parent, if you can talk about it, inform about it, so that the child can get help on the right time, at the right time. That is something that, yeah.
I do think that it is our responsibility as friends to keep an eye
Absolutely.
out for each other. Like, what else are we friends for if not to keep an eye out for each other and support each other? But
Yeah, yeah.
what happens when there is grief to be dealt with?
You know, grief is tough, Tavishee. It's an emotion which cannot be described, to be honest. It's an emotion which is built on a multiple emotions. So it's so many emotions that gives way to grief. And I think grief is one of the most difficult emotions to process for any individual. And for children, it would be devastating, because they've lost something. But I think the opposite of grief is compassion, empathy, understanding, maybe self-compassion. That means taking care of yourself and just letting your grief out, just talking about it. And each individual have their own styles of grieving.
Yeah.
There are some who immediately grieve. There are some who probably take time, and then it hits them after 3-4 months that, this is what it is. Everyone is on a different journey to grieve. And whenever they feel that grief, again, go to your counselor, your therapist, your friends, your parents, and just talk about it. Like, just be okay with whatever you are feeling at that particular time. That's one thing. Something I tried, and it worked for a few people, a few children that I was, working with, is, our mind our willpower is very strong. It's the most constructive organ in our body. I'm talking about the brain and the mind, the most constructive, and is the most destructive. So what builds us also can break us. That's the logic. So I remember telling this one child that, you want to worry, you want to grieve, let's do something. Let's finish this task. So you can train your mind, finish this task by 3 o'clock. You need to finish your assignment, finish this assignment, and after that, grieve as much as you can. It sounds a little insensitive, but it's not insensitive because, as a college student or a high school student, you need to write that exam. You need to finish that assignment. You need to submit it. You need to do your applications. And there's so much going on, and you're taking help, and you are probably talking about your grief. But if that grief is something that is caught so badly that's not letting you go, then your mind can actually save you. You can actually tell yourself, listen, I'm going to grieve, but I'm going to do this first, and then I'm going to grieve later. So that's a training that we do, and it's actually worked for a few people, and they're grieving because it's never a quick solution. You can't fix grief.
Right.
So it's all about managing the mind and the emotion at that time. And of course, they were given a lot of body works as well, which helps them to do it. But like I said, our willpower is something that we have, and our mind can do wonders if we just allow it to do it.
Of course. When we had, when we have incidents like this that happen in schools or in colleges, it kind of shakes everyone up. There's a deadly silence that's hanging in the air. If you look at just a stranger who goes to the same school as you or the same college as you, even if you've never spoken to them before, there's like this understanding. There's like this shared, I hope you're okay kind of look, or a how are you kind of exchange that can happen, even if it's non-verbal. And I think, it takes a toll on the entire institution, either the school or the college. And so I wanted to ask you, how can schools help? What are schools getting right? What are schools getting wrong about handling their students' mental health and taking care of their students' mental health to prevent things like this, and also to handle things like this, God forbid they do happen?
So I think what schools have got right is that they have a counseling department, and they have people who are always talking about, the wellness and mental health and happiness and joy and the emotions so I think that is something that is right, because these conversations are important in schools. So that is something right. But I think something which is not wrong, but it's something which needs to be thought about is, students don't like to go and talk about it to the counselors that are there in school, at least most of them.
Right.
Because when I would like to open my heart out to somebody, I don't want to see them again and again.
Right.
Like, I don't want,
right.
I want to talk
also,
to somebody.
At the end of the day, they're an adult, right? So there's this kind of authority that kind of makes you close up.
Yeah. So that can be a little uncomfortable for the students to go and talk about it, and there are some who don't prefer to talk about it. They try to talk about things to people outside their school. So that's something which I think the schools need to think about, and if the school can offer alternative counselors or people outside, or tie up with organizations where they say, okay, our schools counselors are available to you, but if you're not okay, then you also have these few people who are there as well. That is something that can do wonders for our students. So that's number one. So the second question was, what can we do to make mental health conversations more apt in schools? Is that what you were asking for? So I think, mental health of students. Now, something which needs to be thought about is, we don't really talk about teachers' mental health. We don't talk about parents' mental health. We don't talk about mental health of staff. We don't talk about leaders' mental health. Somehow, schools try to engage with other companies, look at a lot of work for students. But that's very incomplete. and very superficial to a level because your teachers are very restless. They're stressed out. There is anxiety there. The parents are also going through it. So it seems like a very futile exercise. So I think when you're talking about mental health, yes, some programs, some conversations, some campaigns for children on happiness and mental health and emotional health and physical health, for example, all that is important, but somewhere we need to bring the whole community together. It's like an ecosystem because happiness and wellness is not one isolated task or a job. It's like the whole culture. You need to be in that place. It's like going to a beach or going to a forest. The moment you go there, the energy itself is so beautiful and so refreshing and light. You don't need to do anything. You just feel it. That's the space that schools need to build, where they enter and they just feel good and they feel light because you have teachers and you have parents who are also at par with what the schools want to do. So I think that is something which the school is not getting it. And I really hope and pray that schools will work on teachers and the adults' mental health as well, so that the adults can support them.
It's inspiring how you are dedicating your life to kind of making this happen and being there for maybe the parents and the adults who have those anxieties and those fears. I think we need to go back and appreciate how you are helping that change happen. And so I wanted to ask, how do we know what is the right thing for us to do amidst everything that people are telling us to do? So we have our parents telling us to do this, and our friends telling us to do this, teachers telling us to do this, and kind of the toughest part about being a teenager and being in high school or your early years of college is that everyone's telling you different things. And so how do we know what's right for us? And how do we kind of tap into what we actually want? How do we unlock that within ourselves?
Well, you'll figure it out. You'll never know what is right for you. Nobody knows. Even I don't. When I was in college, I was actually studying to do business, but I ended up here. We really don't know. But I think what we need to do is we need to have trust, because that's something that I always tell my students. You will go wherever you are meant to go. And that trust is something that we do not have. And this is that's the destructive part of our mind. It always tells you that you don't know, so know it, because you don't know. So not knowing is also something which is taken as very uncool. Like, how can you not know? How can you not know what you're going to do in the next 1 year? How can you not know what you're going to be, what you're going to do in the next 5 years? But I think the best skill today and best thing to practice today is, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. And students today, they're studying for courses that may not even exist in the next 10 years.
Right.
Like, we don't even know where the world is going to go with AI and technology coming in. We don't even know whether there are some of these, careers that are even going to exist in the next 5 years. 5 years, maybe even a year.
Yeah.
We really don't know. But you know what? Adaptability, flexibility, whatever will happen, I'll figure it out.
Right.
And I trust myself. And the sense of self-worth is very important for a student to really gather, to cultivate, to work on, to reinforce, to build, so that when there are things that's happening, we don't know. But you know what? Life is all about figuring it out. You will figure it out. That is something that you can. And your parents will tell you. Your parents will, prepare you for NEET, and they will prepare you for engineering. But there could be times when you finish 4 years and you realize that's not the stream that I would want to do. That's not what I'm meant to do. And it's okay. Shift. It's never too late.
It's never too late.
It's never too late, and it's absolutely fine. And I think one of the most important skills which adults need to also learn, and also children, I'm talking about adults means parents, teachers, and children means high school students, is really being mindful. That means bringing yourself to the now, because that is something which is going to help you disengage with emotions that are not helping you, emotions that are not constructive, and moving on. it also helps you process pain, because we're very scared of pain. We don't want pain.
Mhm.
We don't want to feel that pain because we want to be happy.
Yeah.
But our life is not about being happy. It's all about really processing pain. And when you have that relationship with pain, so when I talk about pain, it could be grief, it could be loss, it could be, failures, it could be rejection.
Yeah.
These, when you process, if you don't know how to process these emotions, you won't know what happiness and joy is.
Right.
That's the whole thing. You
Really.
can't be happy without addressing pain.
Right.
That's the journey. The journey to real happiness, joy, success is through a lot of pain. I know that this is sounding very cliche, but it's the reality. So what I'm saying is, as adults, as children, don't be afraid of pain.
Hmm.
Or don't be afraid to feel what you're feeling, because that is your feeling. It's something which is yours. It's something that you have, and it's a very, very natural, normal experience. It's a human experience. So don't deny yourself of that human experience.
Yeah.
So it's not living for happiness, it's coming from a space of happiness. So
Right.
you're not working for
Towards.
joy,
Yeah.
but you're working from joy. That is something which we need to work, is to create that sense of joy and happiness within, and it'll all fall in place.
I really love that. It's not working for joy, it's working from joy. I really love that. As we close the session, we come to my favorite part of the episode, which is here's the deal. So, I'm going to ask you to send out one consolidated message that you just need our audience to hear based on everything we've been talking about. What is the one takeaway that you want the audience to have?
Okay, so here's the deal. You're not a machine. You have emotions. You're not your grades, you're not your achievements, you're not even your abilities at this moment, because we are learning every single day. People are going to define you, people are going to talk a lot about you, but you will figure out who you eventually are. So give yourself that permission to to reinvent and to figure out the true side of yourself. And rest is something which is not laziness. Pausing is not something which is not cool. Rest and pause is only going to help you think better, reflect better, and process happiness as well as grief and sadness and anxiety. So, rest, because that's something which is the cool thing to do.
I think a lot of us need to hear that because I think taking rest is something we don't do because we feel so guilty about it. Should we be taking rest? Should we actually take a second to pause when in fact there's so much to do and we always have this fear of constantly lagging behind. And so taking a rest doesn't really help that. But you're
Yeah.
right, we're not machines. We're humans and we need that rest.
So, one more point which I think is important is, when you're not able to do any of these, if you're not able to process your emotions, you're not able to rest, the third and the last thing that you can try is get out of your head and get out of your emotions. And the best way to do that is to work with, let's say, aged adults, do some work with NGOs, contribute to the society. So every time I have somebody who's resisting, change, and they don't know how to get out of their selves. I'm not using the word self-centeredness, but I'm talking about somebody who's very absorbed with themselves and they really are trying to get themselves out of themselves. I say go and contribute, go spend some time with the elder people in some NGOs, some, with children. You will figure out who you are and they will teach you how to come out of it.
That is
Contribute towards
really
others.
that's really unique advice. Like it's not something that you can read anywhere. So thank you for that. And thank you for this entire session. I think everything that you said has been so insightful and so lovely. And I think this is something that every student needs to hear. And I really wish that students would actually listen to this, listen to themselves, trusted themselves. And I wish schools would also kind of give that mental health support that our students need, especially during a time like this. And just to loop back to the start, a time like this where we're so overstimulated and we're so scared of lagging behind, and we have this constant pressure from everywhere about who to be, how to be, where to be in life. And I think there's a lot that we've had to learn from you. So thank you so much for doing this. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I'm your host, Tavishee Banerjee, and we will see you on the next episode of Class Dismissed.